The strangely shaped and wonderfully weird diminished 7. Now, because this chord doesn't fit diatonically into your well-known major or minor scales, you may think this chord is just too limiting. But actually, the diminished 7 chord may be the most versatile out-of-key chord you'll ever learn. The diminished 7 chord is like a tool for creating tension and mystery or emotional depth. Perfect for moments where you want the music to stand out and keep the listener's attention. Now, because it has a minor third, some could actually consider it a type of minor chord, but arguably it's much more dramatic. The diminished 7 chord consists of a root note, a diminished fifth, aka a flat fifth, and a minor third, and a flat 7. Yeah, And yeah, we're not going to get into the theory of why they call it a double flat, and you can Google it if you want to nerd out on the music theory, but in short, it has to do with how the intervals of this chord are stacked in minor thirds, and I will explain that later because it actually works in our favor. Now, due to its outside or non-diatonic sound, the diminished 7th chord is often used to add tension and pull in a chord progression, which resolves extra nicely when we play it before a 1 chord. Let's start with our first use of this chord. In a major chord, we typically use the lowest note as the root note or the tonic for that chord, although this isn't a strict rule. But you wouldn't play a major triad, for example, like an open G, and then consider any of the notes in that chord to be the root note, right? But with a diminished 7th chord, any note in the chord can easily be considered the tonic. Because of this, an A diminished 7th, for example, can also be viewed as a C diminished 7, depending on the context. And really, this makes for a versatile chord you can find easily so long as you know the chord shapes, and if at least one of your notes in that diminished 7th chord shape is your target note. For example, in this diminished 7th chord, we have B, D, G sharp, or also known as A flat, and F. Now, we can consider any one of these notes to be the tonic. It's really about the context of the music. In our last video about 7th chords, we talked about how we can make a diminished 7th chord a passing chord, or like a stepping stone to our next chord, which works especially well when 2 chords we're playing have a single open space between them. And because of the nature of this chord, all we need to do is find the nearest or the easiest diminished 7th chord for us to play with that target note somewhere in there. So if we're playing something like C major to the D minor chord, we can look for a C sharp diminished 7th chord and use it briefly between our C and our D minor. The diminished 7th chord is also commonly used between the 4 and the 5 chords in a major key. So in G major, for example, we can actually insert a diminished 7th chord between our C major chord and our D major chord. So we could play something like this. So in our C major, we can actually insert a diminished 7th chord in between our F and our G chord. So to summarize, in general, one effective way to use a diminished 7th chord is to place them between the natural chords of a key, especially when they have one space in between them. Now, we discussed in our last video how diminished 7th chords don't naturally fit into any major or minor scale, but they do fit diatonically into other exotic sounding scales. One example of this is the harmonic minor scale. So if we actually learned a harmonic minor scale and the chords that fit, we can essentially plug in a diminished 7th chord diatonically, and it should sound great against another chord inside that scale. So for example, in A harmonic minor, the B diminished 7 actually fits diatonically. So we can actually insert a B diminished 7 right before the 1 chord and it'll sound great. We can even identify visually what scale a certain diminished 7th chord fits into. One website I like to use is allguitarchords.com. They actually have a section there where you can actually insert your chords and see what potential scales they fit into. So for example, if we click A and then click minor and then click add and then click B and then diminished 7 and then add, and then we can throw in another one. Let's say the E and we'll put major and then add. So just below the diagram, we actually see that we get a list of potential scales that this could be in. Now this is great if we don't know what scale our chords are in. Maybe we came up with a chord progression that we like, but we don't know what scale it is. We actually plug it in here and see what scales it could potentially be. And really, once we get it here, we can actually visually see any recognizable shapes of chords that fit diatonically into that scale. Now you can see how this is useful because we can also start creating chords by experimenting with stacking different notes and making up chords on the spot. Let's say we came up with a chord here, but we don't know what it's called and we want to know. You can actually go to a different website called olimo.com. Here they have a page where you can actually create chords. and it'll tell you what chord name that is. Now actually all guitar chords has something similar, but it kind of gets confused when you make up really weird chords with weird fingerings. But OOLimo is pretty much guaranteed to give you an answer. So here's a mind-blowing fact about diminished seventh chords that can be useful when you're looking for chords that work together. In the beginning of this video, we talked about how diminished seventh chords are just notes stacked in minor third intervals. So if we actually lay this out across the fretboard, you can actually see how they're separated. They're actually separated by a minor third interval, which would be a whole step plus a half step, or you could say 3 whole frets, or you can think of it as leaving 2 fret gaps between notes. Now because of this, it means we can move any diminished seventh shape up or down the neck by 3 frets, and essentially we're playing the same chord. We're just playing an inversion of that chord. Now inversion just means that you're using the same notes, the same combination of notes, but now they're stacked in a different order. So because every note in this chord is a stacked minor third interval, if we played a diminished seventh shape here and then move it up 3 frets, we get the same notes just stacked in a different order. Now if we move up again another 3 frets, we get the same notes again, but in another different order. Now I tell you, you can't say that about pretty much any other chord. You typically have to go up an entire 12 steps to get the same notes again with the same shape. But that is what's special about diminished seventh chords. Now this is helpful if we have a diminished seventh chord we want to use, but we need it closer or farther away, or let's say we want to play it higher or lower in pitch. Good news is your alternative chord is the same shape. It's just either 3 frets down or 3 frets up. All you need to do is know your diminished seventh shape, maybe the one you prefer, and find a spot on that fretboard where it contains your target note somewhere, anywhere inside it. Another mind-blowing fact is that if you lower any note of a diminished seventh chord by a half a step, you'll automatically have a dominant seventh chord. I don't know how that's useful. So there it is. Diminished seventh chords add flair and dramatic tension to your chord progressions. Once you know the notes you're looking for, they're pretty easy to find from there. But with this dramatic chord in your arsenal, now your pick becomes your paintbrush, your guitar becomes your color palette, and your fingers become, well, your fingers. But as with any art form, there's always more to learn. With that in mind, let's learn about ninth chords. That's going to be right here. Right here.